Hey everybody, I hope you all had a great 4th of July for all my American viewers out there. I certainly did. So today I'm going to be doing a type of video I've never done before, and that's a book review. So the book that I'm going to be reviewing today is The Habsburg Way by Edward Habsburg, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. So this book, I saw a video on Michael Knowles' channel, and he interviewed the guy who made this, right? And so, I'm sure you all know who the Habsburgs are. I'm going to go into like a brief history about who they are, what they did, and all that. But yeah, so I just read this book. It's an incredible book, and I'm going to share with you some of my favorite parts of the book, the things I liked, the things I didn't like. So, the Habsburg dynasty started in modern-day Switzerland out of a castle called Habsburg Castle that still stands today. And during, I believe it was the 12th century, or maybe the 11th century, they were elected as the Holy Roman Emperor, one of their counts. And so they ended up seizing the lands of Steiermark and Austria from Bohemia, the Kingdom of Bohemia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic. So anyway, they get control of Austria, and they would hold on to Austria and for the majority of the time the Holy Roman Empire until the end of World War I. So they last a long time. I'm going to put a map up of their greatest extent. You can see they controlled Spain, the Netherlands, and all of Spain's colonies by extension of Spain. So that includes much of the New World as well. So a very, very prominent dynasty in Europe throughout history. Now, there was, you may have heard of them before because they had a really big problem with inbreeding. And the author goes into it a little bit during this book, but he talks about, okay, like, why did they inbreed? What was going on with this? Well, they had the two lines. They had the Spanish half of the House of Habsburg, and then they had their Austrian half. And so to keep the two connected, they would arrange marriages between, you know, first, second, third cousins, and eventually that led to the famous Habsburg jaw. I'm gonna put a thing up on the screen with that. So yeah, because it was more prominent, like, since they had that in their gene pool and their genes kept on, you know, repeating and all of that genetics, that ended up becoming a really big feature of Habsburgs. And eventually this ended up wiping out the Spanish line of Habsburgs. And the last Habsburg, the King of Spain, the last Habsburg King of Spain, ended up, you know, dying before and not being able to produce an heir because of the problems with inbreeding. And I'll put a picture of him up on the screen as well. So this is the dynasty that we're talking about, probably, if not the one of the most influential and powerful European dynasties of all time. So the author Edward Habsburg is a descendant of many of the rulers in this book. Like, since they're a royal family, obviously you're going to have lots of children, and so he's a part of the Hungarian line of the family, the diplomat to the Holy See for Hungary. And so he made this book because he believes that his family's principles, like many of them traditional Catholic principles, which he shares in this book, are very beneficial, and he thinks that it would make a better society if people followed them. So I'm going to go into that today, not super in depth because I think you should read the book itself, but I'm going to talk about some of the ones I really liked, some of the ones I thought could use some work. So let's get into this. Now, I think that all these rules, if they were followed correctly, I think that they would definitely lead to a better world, a more Catholic world, and one that wouldn't be like we are right now, which is being attacked from all angles. Like, our Catholic Church is under assault by the forces of the devil in the world. So I think that this book really highlights, like, okay, how are we supposed to deal with the problems in our world as Catholics? How are we supposed to deal personally as Catholics? And it takes a good historical look into this, so it's not just, oh, take my word for it. Look at how this man's ancestors and his family dealt with the problems of their world, the rise of liberalism and Freemasonry and all sorts of different movements that were against the Catholic Church throughout history, and see how they ended up dealing with it. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to show you the 7 rules out of the book. So this right here is the 7 rules that are shown. So get married and have lots of children, be Catholic and practice your faith, believe in the empire and in subsidiarity, stand for law and justice and your subjects, know who you are and live accordingly, be brave in battle or have a great general, and die well and have a memorable funeral. So there's 7 of these principles, right, split into 8 different chapters, and I really think that all of these are really great advice for us to live in the 21st century even as Catholics. So like I said, I'm not going to go into the specifics of every single rule. You have to read the book for that, which I really do recommend. But I am going to go into a few of my favorites. I'm not going to share any of the stories, the historical stories. I think those are worth the book itself. But I am going to share, what's the gist of this chapter? Do I agree? And you can decide for yourself if you read the book whether or not you agree with his takes on how Catholics should live in these days. Alright, so the first rule that I really liked was rule number 1, get married and have lots of children. It makes a lot of sense that he made this his first rule. The Habsburgs had a lot of children. He even recounts one of his ancestors had 16 children. She saved the Habsburg dynasty. 16 children, that's a lot. But yeah, so I think it's very important, especially in this day and age where the family is under such assault. They say, oh, don't have many children, don't get married young, just wait until you're basically infertile, then you get married, then you can have a million divorces. The family's under attack, children are under attack in this day and age. But it's crucial that we don't buy into the depopulation myths that are often spread. They say, oh, the world is, there's too many people. That's not true. They said in the 1980s we would literally be starving right now. Literally the world has never been better fed in all of history than right now. It's just not true. Don't believe the lies of the depopulation. We need a young population to take care of the older population. It's a critical part of society. And it's very important as us, as Catholics, to make sure that families who are called to, obviously to having children, just people who are called to having children, right, that they raise these children in the Catholic faith, and that they create many children for the Catholic faith, because these are soldiers of God, and a soldier needs its people for the army. And it really goes into depth into, how did Habsburgs do marriages? Obviously, during, in royalty, they have arranged marriages, or at least they did back when they were in political power. And it talks a lot about how the Habsburgs use marriage politics rather than conquest to advance the goals of their house. For instance, when they were able to inherit the throne of Spain through their tactical marriages, or Burgundy and the Netherlands. So there's definitely something to be said for that, about you got to be wise with your marriage. But then nowadays, how do we do that in the 21st century? Well, we have lots of children, we have good, healthy, strong families, and the family is the fundamental building block of the political structure. If you target the family, then everything will fall down. It's the family, then it's the local government, the community, then it's going to be the state, then it's going to be the federal. Sooner or later, you see everything is falling apart, and that's why the enemy does his very best to attack the family, so then everything else above the family on a larger level will also fall apart. The second rule was split into 2 chapters just because of how long it was, and there's a lot of examples of this, but that's being Catholic and practicing your faith. It might be kind of a no-brainer for somebody who's already Catholic, but we really do need to publicly exercise our faith, because we're not called to be Catholics. Okay, yeah, you're Catholic, then you go home and, oh yeah, you're not Catholic anymore. We're not just, we go to Sunday every week Catholics. We're supposed to be, we are Catholic 100% of the time. We are servants of the church. We're servants of Jesus Christ, and that's what we're called to do. As opposed to the modernist idea that, we're all just, a religion is kind of just like a side thing, like a personality, a personal belief. You can never challenge anybody's religious beliefs or anything like that. No, we're called to be Catholics 100% of the time, and it really goes into detail about, how did his family face problems with the Catholic Church? When Freemasonry infiltrated the family, how did other members of his family stand up against it to save, for instance, monasteries from being shut down by the one Freemason Holy Roman Emperor? And it really goes into detail about, okay, like, how do we have a Catholic culture? They made the culture of Austria in Vienna. How did they do this? How did they make the culture of Vienna a Catholic culture? They held Eucharistic processions. There was always Catholic stuff going on. They were emboldened in their faith, and that's how their faith was so strong. So I think it provides a great number of examples on how we can actually live our Catholic faith in our public life. Rule number 3 was believing in the empire and in subsidiarity. This one was really interesting because you hear believe in the empire. What? I'm an American, right? Because it's weird because we've been taught as Americans from a young age, oh, empire bad, democracy good kind of thing. But really what this chapter is about is believing in the systems that we have, and mostly just in, okay, subsidiarity. That I feel like it's weird because it says believe in the empire and subsidiarity, but it talks a lot more about the latter than the former. So on the topic of subsidiarity, right? We in America had, or we say we have it now, but we really definitely had it before, which is, okay, like, we solve things on the local level, the smallest level, and then larger things are only used as a last a last measure, right? It's a Catholic virtue, that of subsidiarity, leaving things at the smallest level that you can deal with them, because the people closest to an issue are best prepared to deal with that issue. For instance, you don't need the federal government's help to deal with the dispute with a neighbor. Now, if your local level can't deal with that dispute because it's too big, then it'll go up to like a state level. And if the state can't deal with it, then yeah, it's like that. Think of it like a court system almost, right? Like up to the Supreme Court. Now, this virtue of subsidiarity is absolutely under attack, and especially it makes sense in the modern context of Europe, with the European Union, which seeks more and more to take away the subsidiarity of its different countries, and really just forcing liberalism on a lot of these Catholic countries that don't want it, and notably Hungary in this case. But this book talks a lot about the virtue. Okay, so in the 1800s, Austria ruled over a lot of lands. I'm going to put up the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or before it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I'm talking about why it's called the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So they were ruled by Austria, except the Hungarian people kept on revolting because they wanted independence. So to deal with this, they created what's called a dual monarchy. So instead of it being, okay, we're one kingdom, you are subject to Austria, instead, I am the ruler of Austria and the ruler of Hungary. You get autonomy, and I get to rule my people, and I'm going to give your people as much autonomy as I can as a monarch. And so that was the idea, a really good idea. So that talks about that and how the Habsburgs exercised it, because whenever they ended up trying to take away, for instance, like they were like, let's take away the subsidiarity of our people, let's take away their autonomy. Well, things didn't go well. The Habsburg Empire was always at its height when they respected local customs. And so we should do so in our own lives. For instance, like we need to, like when it comes to politics, we should try to deal with things on the smallest level and not believe in like really big government unless it's absolutely necessary. The last principle in the book, and the last principle I'm going to talk about, this last rule, is dying well. Now, the modern idea of a good death is, I'm going to die in the middle of the night. Nobody's even going to know. I'm not going to know. It's just going to be like, boop, I'm dead. And you won't even have any pain or anything like that. That is not the Catholic or traditional view of what a good death is. The good death in the traditional and the Catholic idea is I'm going to die slowly, I'm going to die surrounded by family, and I'm going to die receiving the sacraments and being ready and prepared to be, to enter into the kingdom of Jesus Christ. That is the traditional view of a good death. And it talks about how the Habsburgs had very humble and good funerals, and that's a really important part, is really just dying well, and then also making sure that your funeral is good and humble and isn't just bragging about you, or not just maybe mourning. Like mourning is an important thing, but you also need to leave some room for the glorification of God and humility. So I thought this chapter was really insightful, especially because of how countercultural it is, really this idea of dying well as opposed to the world. So here's all the things I liked about the book. So I really liked all the history. It has a lot of really interesting and fun stories about his various ancestors and family throughout the almost 1,000 years that the Habsburgs ruled. And that it's really good. I think I love history personally, and I could really appreciate that part. Now, he's not a historian, the author, and he's not claiming to be. He clarified that at the beginning of the book, but he does want to dive into his family history, considering, I mean, when most of us hear our family history, it's like, oh, okay, that's like it's like maybe it's not super duper interesting, but his, I mean, they've literally had a chunk of the world under their control. So I really appreciate the historical aspect of it. Another thing I like about this book is that I think that the rules, if they were applied to all leaders and all people in our society, I think we'd live in a much better society. Really just being able to respect the laws of God, but then also having lots of children and standing up for the truth, standing up for what's right, standing up for autonomy on the smallest level. I think that all these principles, if they were practiced in this day and age, would make for a really, really good world and country. A third thing I really liked about the book was it has a very clear Catholic message. This is a book that's written from the Catholic perspective. And if you really want to get a good look on, how should we Catholics view early modern history, and how should we view the problems of our world, I think that this book is really good for looking at, a semi-political but mostly historical view, and also just getting a good view of this family from a historical account you usually don't hear from. Usually we hear about how bad the monarchy is, how bad royal families have been from people who aren't, royals at all. And here you have one who, is a part of a royal family who's going to tell you himself. So it's definitely good for that perspective. So those are the things I like about the book. Let me go into some things I didn't really like about the book. So the only thing I really didn't like about the book was they had a chapter called Being Brave in Battle and Standing for Law and Justice. I didn't think they had a really good implication in my life personally, because I'm not going to war except for spiritual war, and then standing for law and justice is good, but obviously I can't really do that because I'm not a politician. So I think that they a lot of the other rules could apply to pretty much anybody, and I liked that. I felt like these, the way that he explained them, really I didn't think they clicked with me very well. I mean, the stories were amazing. I agree with both of the principles. And I think they would be really good for somebody who, is in the position that they could do that. But I don't think the average person could really do that. But that's the only complaint I have about the book, was the relatability of those two chapters. Now, despite my criticisms, I would actually still rate the book a 10 out of 10. This book, it was very easy for me to read. I'm usually kind of bad with, being able to sit down and read a book. I just, it's difficult. I don't have the longest attention span. This book, I was just oh, I really want to read this. So I sat down and I could just go through, 2.5 hours. Wouldn't even notice. It was crazy. I was reading, insane. I was reading, a lot more than I usually would. So I really enjoyed reading this book. I thought the contents were great. I thought that the Catholic faith displayed in this were incredible. So I would rate this book a 10 out of 10 from my very unprofessional opinion, but I really enjoyed the book. So I would recommend you all check it out. I got it ordered on Amazon, so I'm sure you can get it wherever. Just look up. This is the Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times by Edward Habsburg. Thank you all for watching this review, and God bless.